Good morning. My name is Tom McQueenie. I'm a professor at Cal State San Bernardino in public administration and governance, and the associate director of the Institute for Public Management and Governance at the university. I am supposed to be sharing the dais with my friends today, Dale Watson and Mark Harrington, with whom I've worked for the past year setting up this program. But I'm not. I'm here in my home in Rancho Mirage, California. It's a beautiful day, but I'm here against my wishes because about 3 weeks ago, in a moment of total hubris, I climbed a ladder to trim some hedges around my home with a brand new trimmer that I had, and I missteps, fell backward off the ladder, fell on a concrete sidewalk, and broke my pelvis in 3 places. So as much as I'd like to be there, I can't get out of my chair these days. I'm about 2 weeks away from walking again, I think. So it's painful, it's disappointing. I'm sorry I'm there. But in discussing this with my colleagues who have worked hard on the approach, I thought it might be beneficial for me to spend about 3 or 4 more minutes talking about the notion, the central notion of this program, which is called the facilitated self-assessment. It's an effective methodological tool, an evaluation tool, that the purpose of which is to gain insights from those that typically are not part of an objective data gathering process. By talking to the people who have the greatest stake in the program and to gaining in a focus group like environment their understanding of the vulnerabilities as they see them. Despite the incredible effort that has been done to secure facilities and programs, you get a different perspective, and I think a more valuable perspective, which adds an additional tool in the arsenal of those who are trying to enhance public safety. So I'd like to share that with you briefly today. I'm going to spend a few minutes, and my colleagues will spend the rest of the time talking about it in terms of our program. We first tried this effort, I did, working with Dale Watson as he became the first assistant director of the FBI, to put together a terrorism prevention program in the days when the Bureau's responses were primarily a reaction to events and perhaps a focus on preparedness, to be prepared for the event, but not so much on prevention, to find out what can be done to stop the event from even being contemplated. And so we identified a series of things that was relevant in those days to the FBI's terrorism program, and they were the extent to which investigations were doing what they were supposed to be doing. They whether or not leads were being followed in all parts of the state, whether or not those who were suspect or suspicious incidences were being exploited by the entire FBI office, and they found out basically that they were not as well as they could have been. Intelligence, of course, was very well known. Not only were translations or FISA translations and intercepts not being translated and stacking up in the offices, but there was very little effective exploitation of knowledge at that time. The third area was whether or not the Bureau itself was communicating its efforts back and forth, things that it knew to other colleagues, whether or not there was good relationships with state and locals, and finally whether the program was effectively being managed. Those are the 5 areas that we thought if there were a terrorist event, one of those areas would have been the key to being able to prevent it. And so we were able to work with each of the 56 offices of the FBI and to get the people on the ground with the responsibility, the supervisors and the mid-level managers, to chat with us about their sense of vulnerabilities and actually report them their opinion about whether or not the Bureau was doing everything possible or not, whether it was approaching the concept of maximum feasible capability or whether there were big vulnerabilities that were being left unaddressed. And as you could imagine, in those days, more than half of the FBI offices reported significant vulnerabilities that were not being effectively addressed. And that became the basis of Dale's total change in approach to the terrorism program and his strategy, which was ultimately picked up by the counterintelligence program at the FBI. We used this approach to help the Navy and its programs, the NCIS, and to develop the very well-known information sharing program called LINKS, in which we asked people to what extent real live data is actually being shared that was useful. I was asked to go into the nation's coal mines a few years ago because of the rash of explosions and unnecessary deaths. And the coal miners themselves came up with a significant list of areas in which they felt they were unaddressed vulnerabilities that the inspections and the state inspections and the Labor Department inspectors were just missing. And so it's not a critique of the others, but it's a perspective that only those that have their hands on the buttons and are working in the area and are going to experience both the problems if there is an event and perhaps the vulnerabilities themselves, they're the ones that have the greatest idea and the focus of what may be left to unaddressed issues that may need some different kind of focus. So shortly after Parkland, Dale and I chatted and we asked ourselves the question, could this process work for school shooting? And the more we got into it, we saw we could. First of all, we read virtually the reports on every single school shooting in the past 15, 20 years and realized that like the terrorism thing, there were about 5 or 6 categories that every school shooting fell into. And we began wondering if we simply asked the people in the schools what they thought about those categories, despite the threat assessments, despite the emergency response teams, despite the money that's being spent, do they feel much safer? And are they aware that the problem has been taken care of, or do they still fear that a student or 2 or 3 could kind of break through the maze? And those areas were pretty obvious, but we decided to put them into our little list. The first one was the overall security law enforcement approach. And the second one was intelligence. Are we exploiting the information the way that it should be? The third was, of course, the mental health issue. The fourth was the extent to which the school administration is involved in a way that is productive in all situations. And the fourth was the extent to which the community, the fifth, is being exploited for leads and information. And in every area so far, as we've talked to people, we found rather significant concerns, even after a lot of work has been done. In terms of law enforcement, we have had people tell us that they're concerned that although we're reporting new surveillance cameras, there's huge areas of the school that is not covered, classrooms and hallways, that concerns them. We had one guidance counselor tell us in a freeze and fire drill that she walked the students out the back door as she was instructed, only to find that a cyclone fence gate was padlocked with a big chain, and the kids were pushed up against the back fence. And she said, had that been a shooting, there would have been about 50 kids that would have been lame ducks for a shooter. And that was something that wasn't picked up in the various studies. The intelligence heard over and over again that information is being collected but not really exploited or analyzed. Mental health was, of course, the biggest one, where school counselors were saying they're so overwhelmed, kids with stressors, that there's no profile they can think of that says they're adequately dealing with the kids, and they know there are kids out there that have problems that are not being dealt with. They hear information and they just can't get to it. The school administrations, we heard stories after story about some who are not clocked in or not aware of or don't think it's their job. And finally, under the issue of the community help, I had a school resource officer tell me that there are all kinds of leads in the community that they should be following, but he just can't get to them. Now, this is not a complaint or a criticism of the existing process. It's a different look. It's not a look from the perspective of an expert who's going to come in and do an assessment, but it's a look from the perspective of the person who is on the ground, going to feel the brunt of the response to the event, sees things that probably don't raise itself to an issue of a complaint, but if you ask them in their heart of hearts, are you troubled by these things, you get a different answer. And what we have found in all those areas I told you is that collecting those perceptions, that it's a self-assessment and led by a facilitator who keeps asking and probing until they talk. I had people tell me that things are okay until I find somebody in the room who's making a funny face, and I'm saying, what's bothering you? And they'll say something about something that leads others to discuss it. Next thing you know, the room and even the security people who were there, the law enforcement people who were there, say, yes, we probably haven't done as good a job in this area as we thought we would have. That's the basis for the facilitated self-assessment. The facilitated self-assessment made a big deal in one school by talking about that padlock gate. And there was nobody who was making sure that the kids could get out of the various places they needed to get out of. And the law enforcement folks there agreed with that. And they had just gone through a threat assessment. So that's all I wanted to do, was kind of set the stage for the discussion that you're going to hear from my colleagues today, because I think it's a program that I know at Cal State San Bernardino and I know at George Mason we're going to be picking up with a certificate program to help train people in self-assessments. And I know that we're going to be doing conferences in which we do workshops for school districts to kind of go through model self-assessments. And I know we're going to make ourselves available to anybody who wants to hear us talk to them one-on-one about our experiences. So I urge you to look at this, to perhaps contact us if you have some interest, to add some thoughts to the process. It's a work in progress, but I do believe, because I've been doing this now for 20 years, that it is a different approach and a highly valuable approach. Well, I've overdone my time here, and I want to stop and, again, wish you the best on the conference. I hope you've had a good time so far, and I hope you enjoy Chicago. I'm going to check out at this point in time, and hopefully I can get this tape to Dale and Mark in time for them to show it today. I wish you the best, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.